All right, so we're diving into the life of Pablo Escobar today.
Yeah.
And we're going beyond just like the basic facts and dates.
Right.
We're trying to figure out like how this guy went from pretty humble beginnings to being like this global icon
Yeah.
with a legacy that's both fascinating and also really disturbing.
It's true. And, the thing that really gets me about Escobar's story is that it, challenges how we usually think about good and evil.
Right.
He was a brutal drug lord, killed tons of people.
Yeah.
But he also built schools and homes for poor people and earned their, total loyalty.
It's crazy.
It's like, how do you reconcile those two sides of the same guy? That's what we're going to try and unpack today.
Exactly. It's a puzzle with like missing pieces almost.
Yeah.
So let's start putting it together by going back to his early life.
Okay.
So Escobar was born in 1949 in Rionegro, Colombia.
Right.
And his family was, by most accounts, pretty poor.
Yeah.
But there's this interesting thing where his family history is full of like these influential figures.
Oh, really?
Politicians, landowners, people in authority.
Huh.
It's like there was this blueprint for power in his family, even if it wasn't obvious at the time.
That's so interesting because it adds another layer to that whole rags to riches thing that people always say about Escobar.
Right.
It suggests that he was exposed to power dynamics from a young age.
Exactly.
Maybe even felt like he was entitled to it in some way.
Yeah. And even as a kid, Escobar was super cunning.
Oh, yeah.
Always hustling, looking for an angle.
What kind of stuff did he do?
Started with small-time scams selling fake lottery tickets.
Wow.
Even stealing tombstones.
Tombstones.
Yeah. He would have them sandblasted and then resell them.
That's wild.
Oh, right.
That's not just kids stuff, though, right? There's this scary pragmatism there.
Yeah.
This willingness to exploit anything and anyone to make money.
Totally.
And no respect even for death.
It's like he was practicing,
Yeah.
honing his skills for bigger things down the line.
Right.
So from petty scams, he moved on to car theft. And then something way worse, kidnapping for ransom.
Oh, wow.
And this is where we start to see him become really ruthless.
What do you mean?
Escobar and his gang would often tear up the ransom notes.
Even after they got the money?
Even after.
What?
It wasn't just about the money.
No.
It was about sending a message, like, mess with me and you'll regret it.
It's chilling.
It is, and it foreshadows that whole philosophy he became known for.
What, silver or lead?
Exactly. Bribe me or face the consequences. It was a way to control people through fear.
Of course.
But it also speaks to a bigger problem in society.
What do you mean?
The corruption that allowed someone like Escobar to gain so much power.
Right, he exploited the weaknesses in the system.
Exactly. He found the cracks and used them to his advantage.
Wow.
And then the 1970s hit, and the demand for cocaine just exploded.
Especially in the U.S.
Yeah, and Escobar, being the opportunist that he was, he saw this as his chance to make a serious fortune.
And he did way more than just dip his toes in. He had bigger plans.
He wanted to change the whole drug trade.
Exactly.
So he co-founded the Medellín Cartel.
With some heavy hitters.
Like Carlos Leader and the Ochoa brothers.
Yep, some of the most notorious names in the business.
And together they built this huge smuggling operation.
Unlike anything the world had ever seen.
And they had this amazing setup.
What was that?
Norman's Cay in the Bahamas.
Norman's Cay?
Yeah, they used it as a transshipment point.
What, like a hideout?
It was a whole island turned into a logistics hub for cocaine.
An entire island?
They had an airstrip, harbor houses for workers, even a refrigerated warehouse.
To store the cocaine?
To store the cocaine before it was flown to the U.S.
That's insane! They turned a whole island into a drug operation.
It shows just how much money and power they had.
They bribed officials, dodged law enforcement, created this network that just pumped cocaine into the global market.
It was a criminal enterprise on a scale that was almost unimaginable at the time. And by the 1980s, Escobar was reportedly moving something like 70 to 80 tons of cocaine into the U.S. every single month.
Every month? That's incredible.
Forbes ranked him the 7th richest man in the world.
Wow.
This wasn't just drug money anymore.
It was like the wealth of a nation.
Exactly. And with that wealth came a very calculated move.
What was that?
He started cultivating this Robin Hood image.
Robin Hood?
He funded community projects in poor neighborhoods, built homes, schools, football fields, even entire neighborhoods.
Trying to give back to the community he came from.
Maybe, or maybe it was a strategy to gain loyalty and protection from the people.
So it was either genuine philanthropy or a calculated PR move.
It's hard to say for sure.
That's fascinating.
And then things get even more complicated when you consider his move into politics.
Oh, right. He wanted to be president at one point, didn't he?
He had ambitions, but in 1982, he was elected as an alternate member of the Colombian Congress.
So he got a taste of that political power.
He did. And it gave him a level of legitimacy, parliamentary immunity, even a diplomatic passport.
It's crazy to think about a known drug trafficker trying to infiltrate the government like that.
It really is. But his political career didn't last long.
What happened?
A brave justice minister named Rodrigo Lara Bonilla publicly accused Escobar of drug trafficking and ties to paramilitary groups,
Oh, wow.
including this terrifying group called Death to Kidnappers.
That's a chilling name.
Escobar was kicked out of Congress, and that's when things really started to heat up.
Yeah, I remember reading about Los Extraditables.
Right, that was the group Escobar led.
Made up of powerful drug lords who absolutely did not want to be extradited to the U.S.
They saw it as a betrayal, and they were willing to fight to prevent it.
They were afraid of facing much harsher sentences in American prisons.
Absolutely, and that fear turned into a reign of terror.
Yeah. Lara Bonilla, the justice minister who challenged Escobar, was assassinated in 1984.
That was a turning point.
It was.
Escobar declared war on the Colombian government.
And the country descended into chaos.
Car bombs, assassinations, the whole fabric of society was unraveling.
And then there was the Palace of Justice siege.
One of the most horrific events in Colombian history.
Guerrillas stormed the Supreme Court building,
Allegedly funded by Escobar.
demanding an end to extradition.
Over 100 people died, including 11 Supreme Court judges.
A national tragedy.
It really was, and there's still so much debate about Escobar's role in it.
Right, some people deny it completely while others claim he was a key player.
Like Virginia Vallejo.
The journalist who had an affair with Escobar.
She claims he helped finance the operation.
It's a dark chapter, and it shows just how far Escobar's power reached.
But then, in 1991, something unexpected happened.
What was that?
Escobar surrendered.
He surrendered.
He did, but it wasn't a true surrender.
What do you mean?
It was more like a strategic move to control the situation.
So he could dictate his own terms.
Exactly. He was allowed to build his own prison.
I remember that, La Catrol.
It was more like a luxury resort than a prison.
Seriously?
He continued running his empire from inside.
Oh.
And then get this. He even turned on some of his former allies.
What? Why?
He demanded more money from them, asserted his dominance.
So he traded a war on the streets for a war within the cartel.
It's like he couldn't exist without conflict.
And the Cali cartel was also gaining power at this time, right?
They were Escobar's main rivals.
So the drug trade was becoming even more fragmented.
Yeah, the fight for control is far from over. But La Catedral couldn't contain Escobar forever.
Of course not.
In 1992, when authorities realized what he was doing, they tried to move him to a real prison.
And he escaped.
He did. It was a huge embarrassment for the government.
They launched a nationwide manhunt, right?
They did. The Medellín Cartel was crumbling, and Escobar was desperate.
He had few allies left, and his family was constantly on the run.
Facing threats from both the authorities and this vigilante group called Los Pepes.
They were funded by Escobar's enemies seeking revenge.
It was a dangerous game of cat and mouse.
That ultimately ended in tragedy.
On December 2nd, 1993, just one day after his 44th birthday.
He was killed in a rooftop shootout.
In Medellín.
There are still a lot of theories about how he died.
Some say suicide. Others say he was killed by Los Pepes or even the police.
It's a mystery that endures.
And with his death, a chapter of Colombian history closed.
But his legacy is far more complex than the rise and fall of a cartel.
It's about power, wealth, the fight for justice.
It's a story that continues to shape Colombia and the world.
Before we go any further, I want to ask what stood out to you so far?
Yeah, what surprised you? What questions are you thinking about?
Take a moment to reflect on what you've heard, because in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to explore how Escobar's death changed the drug trade.
We'll look at how Colombians felt about him.
And the surprising ecological impact of his extravagant lifestyle.
It's a wild ride.
So stick with us. Escobar's death definitely marked the end of an era, but the drug trade didn't just disappear.
No, of course not.
It's like when one powerful figure's gone, someone else steps in.
Always someone waiting to fill the void.
In this case, it was the Cali cartel.
They had been operating alongside the Medellín cartel for years, but with a very different style.
Right, they were more strategic.
Less overtly violent, less in your face.
Yeah, while Escobar was all about brutality and intimidation.
The Cali cartel preferred bribery and corruption.
They were more subtle,
Yeah, they wanted to blend in, become part of the system.
And they understood that real power isn't just about force.
It's about influence, about controlling the system from within.
They were playing the long game.
And for a while, it seemed to be working.
They gained wealth and power.
But it didn't last forever.
Right by the mid-90s, most of their leaders were captured or killed.
Another reminder that criminal empires, no matter how powerful, are built on shaky ground.
Eventually, the law catches up.
Exactly.
It's a constant battle, right?
It is a struggle between those who exploit the system and those who try to uphold it.
So back to Escobar.
Yeah.
His legacy is complicated, to say the least.
That's putting it mildly.
He was a ruthless criminal responsible for so much violence,
But he's also remembered by some as a hero.
especially in Medellín,
That's the paradox of Pablo Escobar, right?
the Robin Hood myth.
The outlaw who steals from the rich and gives to the poor.
And he was great at using that image to his advantage.
Oh, he knew how to manipulate people.
He built homes and schools for the poor.
Funded community projects, presented himself as a champion of the downtrodden.
And it worked.
People loved him.
Over 25,000 people attended his funeral.
That's incredible.
How do you explain that?
It's complicated.
It really is.
For people living in poverty, neglected by the government, Escobar offered a glimmer of hope.
He provided things they desperately needed,
And that created a strong sense of loyalty.
even if it was loyalty built on blood money.
Exactly.
It forces us to confront this uncomfortable truth,
What's that?
that even a brutal criminal can be seen as a savior.
Yeah, it's a tough pill to swallow.
And speaking of uncomfortable truths,
Yeah.
let's talk about Hacienda Nápoles.
Escobar's extravagant estate,
Now it's a theme park.
with attractions, restaurants, a museum.
It's strange to think about tourists walking around a place that used to be the heart of a criminal empire.
It's a bizarre mix of beauty and darkness.
On the one hand, you have this incredible landscape,
A reminder of Colombia's natural beauty.
and on the other, you have these remnants of a dark past.
The echoes of violence and excess.
It makes you think about how we deal with the legacies of controversial figures.
Right. Can you separate the person from the myth?
Can you appreciate the beauty of a place while acknowledging its dark history?
It's a tough question.
And then there's the whole hippo thing.
The hippos.
Yeah, it's a weird but fascinating example of unintended consequences.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So Escobar had a private zoo at Hacienda Nápoles.
I remember reading about that.
He had all sorts of exotic animals, including 4 hippos.
Hippos in Colombia?
Yeah, and after he died, they were basically abandoned,
They just roamed free.
pretty much. And they loved it. They adapted to the climate, they reproduced, and now there's a whole population of them.
No.
Over 80 hippos living in the Magdalena River Basin.
Descendants of Escobar's private collection.
They're considered an invasive species now.
They must be causing problems.
They compete with native wildlife, they change the ecosystem.
That's a real challenge for conservationists.
Figuring out how to manage this population while also being ethical.
It's a unique situation.
But it's not just the hippos that serve as a reminder of Escobar's impact.
What else?
In 2019, they demolished his infamous apartment building, Edificio Monaco.
Oh, wow, the one in Medellín.
Yeah, it was a symbol of his reign of terror.
It had been bombed by the Cali cartel back in '88.
And it just sat there abandoned for decades.
A reminder of the violence.
They tore it down and built a park in its place.
A park dedicated to the victims.
It was a powerful statement,
a way of reclaiming the space.
choosing to honor those who suffered.
It's about healing and moving forward.
But before we talk about Escobar's personal life, I want to go back to this fascination people have with him.
Yeah, even people who condemn his actions are still drawn to his story.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's partly the bad boy appeal. The rebel who defies authority and becomes powerful.
And his story has been told so many times.
In books, movies, TV shows.
The name Pablo Escobar is almost synonymous with the drug trade.
It's a brand.
The media plays a huge role in shaping how we see him.
The lines between reality and fiction get blurred.
It's easy to get caught up in the romanticized version of his life.
And forget about the real human cost of his actions.
So how do we balance this fascination with the need to remember the victims?
It's a delicate balance.
It is.
We can explore his life without glorifying him.
We can learn about the context without condoning the violence.
And maybe most importantly, we can use his story as a cautionary tale.
A reminder of the dangers of greed and corruption.
And the allure of easy money.
It's a conversation that needs to happen everywhere, not just in Colombia.
Escobar's legacy is a global one.
The drug trade affects us all.
It's a complex issue.
That demands thoughtful solutions.
We can't just focus on law enforcement.
We need to address the root causes.
Poverty, inequality, Lack of opportunity.
We need to invest in education, healthcare, and economic development.
Those are the things that can truly make a difference.
The long and difficult journey.
But it's the only way to break the cycle of violence.
So Pablo Escobar's story is dark and disturbing.
But it's also captivating and challenging.
Now, let's take a closer look at the man behind the myth.
The man who was both a loving father and a ruthless criminal.
Let's explore his relationships and see what insights they can offer. We've talked about the empire, the myth, the impact. But who was Pablo Escobar, like, as a person?
Right, like outside of the headline.
Beyond the Netflix series.
To get a real sense of him, we need to look at the people who are closest to him.
The ones who knew him best.
And I think the most complex relationship was probably with his wife, Maria Victoria Henao.
They married so young.
She was only 15.
It's hard to imagine.
And despite all the infidelity, the constant danger, she stuck with him through it all.
That's crazy to think about.
To live with that level of fear and uncertainty.
But still be devoted to the man responsible for it.
It's a level of complexity that's hard to grasp.
In her memoir, Maria describes Escobar as a man of contradictions.
Yeah, like she talks about moments of tenderness and affection.
A loving father.
But also the darkness, the ruthlessness, the control that made him so scary.
And their kids, Juan Pablo and Manuela.
Imagine growing up with a father who is both a doting parent and a notorious criminal.
Yeah. How do you reconcile those two versions of your dad?
Juan Pablo actually changed his name to Sebastian Marican.
Right.
He's spoken out against his father's legacy, condemned the violence, and asked for forgiveness from the victims' families.
It's a powerful attempt to break free from his father's shadow. Their stories really humanize this whole saga.
Yeah.
It reminds us that behind the myth, the legend,
We're real people.
trying to navigate this crazy life.
And we can't forget about Escobar's other relationships.
Like his affair with the journalist Virginia Vallejo.
Oh, yeah.
Her memoir is pretty explosive.
Loving Pablo, hating Escobar.
It gives a really scandalous look into their relationship.
She saw a side of Escobar that most people never did.
The world of power, corruption, violence.
She was right there in the thick of it.
And she didn't hold back in her account.
No, she didn't.
She talked about their passionate romance.
But also about Escobar's connections to powerful people.
Even accused some Colombian presidents of being involved with drug cartels.
Pretty shocking stuff.
It's like she pulled back the curtain on a secret world.
Where the lines between love, power, and danger were completely blurred.
Her book caused a lot of controversy.
Some people disputed her claims.
But regardless, it gives us another piece of the puzzle.
Another glimpse into who Pablo Escobar really was.
So after looking at all these different aspects of his life,
The question remains.
who was the real Pablo Escobar?
Yeah.
Maybe there's no simple answer.
He was a product of his time.
A man driven by ambition, greed, a thirst for power.
He was a master manipulator.
A ruthless criminal.
But also someone who inspired both loyalty and fear.
It's a reminder that the pursuit of wealth and power, without any morals or compassion,
Can lead to destruction that lasts for generations.
his story forces us to think about human nature.
The allure of easy money. The seductive nature of power.
And it shows how important it is to understand the social and political forces that allow figures like Escobar to rise in the first place.
We can't just label him a monster.
Or romanticize him as a folk hero.
It's about recognizing the complexities that made him who he was.
And as you continue to learn about this period of history,
Remember that Escobar's legacy isn't just about one man.
it's about the fight for justice, the struggle for peace.
And the ongoing battle against corruption around the world.
This deep dive has hopefully given you a better understanding of Pablo Escobar.
It's a starting point.
Keep digging, keep asking questions.
Keep exploring.
There's always more to discover.
More to learn.
And more to think about when it comes to the man who was both a kingpin and a cautionary tale.